Welcome to the Sacred Spaces Conservancy Podcast. And I have a good friend here today, Pastor Scott of the Foundry. And today we're going to be talking about three of our pillars at Sacred Spaces Conservancy. One is Sacred Shift. It's our curriculum that helps existing churches that don't have a building find a building. And then we're going to be talking about issues of sustainability, which most churches in America are facing. And then what it looks like for a church to look beyond their use of the building to a legacy where a church that's over 100 years old can live in perpetuity for God's purposes forever and ever. But before we get into all that, I want to introduce you to my friend Scott. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and what you're doing right now.
Hey, Scott Ancarrow, currently live in Baltimore, Maryland, lead pastor of the Foundry Church, from Western Maryland originally.
Awesome. And how long has the Foundry been around?
We planted in 2013, so we just celebrated our 12th birthday.
So what were some of the challenges you faced when you planted with finding a space in a city like Baltimore?
Oh, man, it was brutal. I think it was literally 50 or 60 places on a list, reaching out, checking in, seeing about availability. Some people looking at us going, yeah, we would never rent to you. Sorry, not sorry. And other people going, yes, we'd love to rent to you. It's only going to cost, $5,000 a Sunday or whatever, right. So there was so much, especially then with the designation of how Baltimore City, it's an older city. So like some places have parking, some places don't. And we're just living in that constant. I mean, it took a long time. It was the hardest part for the preparation of our public launch. I feel like we were in the 11th hour before we found one.
Yeah. And the thing is I would say, tell me what you think. I would say pretty much 95+% of churches that start face these similar problems. You agree?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's
seems
normal,
to be pretty standard. Right? Yeah.
And you would think that we would be a little bit more strategic in our approach to this. It's almost like, let's find the person, let's get the people, let's get resources, and we'll just worry about that building thing later.
Right, yeah.
It works itself out.
Yeah, kind
of haphazardly. But it's part of the strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be something that we're far more strategic about from a kingdom. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm just saying strategically, which is one of the reasons why one of our passion is to really promote and to try to put into the hands of churches that are looking for spaces our Sacred Shift curriculum. Because we think, when you think about the usefulness of spaces, that how many people get baptized there, how many people get saved there, how many people come in about to leave their marriage and they stay, and how many people come in there thinking, I don't need to be anymore, but they meet God and they meet God's people, and there's spiritual transactions and spiritual formation that happens. So much happens in these places, and they're so needed that we want to make sure that churches have all the resources they have to actually organize and mobilize their body to really take a strategic approach to it. What were some of the things you guys did? You said like 60 spaces. What were some of the things you guys did to try to find this space?
We were looking for, we had to have some level of determination about what it is we were looking for. We were very clear about we needed a space that engaged the next generation, that we had to find kind of a space that had a gathering, essentially two gathering places. We were looking for, the ability to, could I say to a random person in my neighborhood, we're over here, and you go, oh yeah, I know where that is.
Right.
If not by the building itself, by some sort of moniker or identifier, to say now where we are, I could say to people, we're on Riverside Park.
Yeah.
Where's Riverside Park? The pool. Oh yeah, the pool.
Right.
We that kind of thing. So those were some of the things early on that, we're going, hey, this is where we want to be. And it's funny, in hindsight, there were church buildings in a lot of those kinds of places.
Yeah. And sometimes if we just can stop with all the kind of spiritual and ecclesiological makeup and just talk honestly, existing churches can see you new guys as like predators. You guys just want our buildings.
100%.
You know,
100%.
You're like, rah, you're the church in the bush and they're the zebra, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And I wish we could do more work. And this is some of the things we try to do, to partner with existing congregations to say, hey, new churches aren't predators. They're friends.
Yeah.
And we're part of a kingdom ecosystem.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to repurpose or share your building, that's totally fine. But there are other churches that do. One of the things we try to do, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of it, is networking.
Yeah.
So that we know the churches that want to share space and we can connect them with the churches that need the space.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense that we have all these weird things going on and we're not more strategical, because the end game is to impact our communities, our cities with God and the gospel.
Yeah. The message, I remember that pretty vividly, because I wanted the neighborhood pastors to know, like, I care about the work you do.
Right.
Like, and I know not every, and you know, one of the challenges, of course, is that not everyone does honor what's already there and the legacies that have been in place. But one of the things I think Sacred Spaces, I hear that and I'm grateful for it, is, you know, the ability to facilitate those conversations. That's like bringing people to a place of mutual trust. That's helping, you know, the young, eager church planter go, hey, you know, you're gonna, you know, this, you do have to pay some respect and honor to the things that are here, but also help that congregation see that as a new, there's often really great intentions, but there's not intentionality to open themselves up to the community.
One of the things I think you did well, and I hope more new pastors of new churches would do, is, in all the years that I've known you since you came in, I mean, I met you pretty early, you never came into a new place with the sometimes too often used slogan, I'm here because no one else is doing what should be done. No one else is preaching the gospel in this city.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes new church planners think they have, the way to sell what they're doing to get funded is to paint this picture so that they're the answer to the problem.
Right. Yeah.
But only them.
Right.
Like no one else is in the city doing it. And we get the point. We're not trying to slam them, but that messaging, when it gets to existing church pastors, doesn't exactly make them think, you know what? I think I want to share my space with that person who thinks I'm not doing anything. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I'm now being in a space and being in the neighborhood for 12 years. I can imagine how I would receive that very same exchange, right?
Right.
Like
young hotshot, and they're all fired up, and no ill motives. They're just fired up.
They're fired up.
They think this much should be done, and only they see this much, and they're like, "Well, you guys aren't doing it, so I'm going to come in and we're going to do it." But so, what were some of the challenge you faced once you found the space you're in now?
So yeah, we found the space, and then the practical reality is it relieved one immediate issue, but then created a multitude of others. Right. The immediate issue it relieves is like, hey, it's no longer X amount of dollars for 4 hours on a Sunday. I mean, I think when we looked at all of the things we were paying rental fees on, we were at like $80,000 in rental fees a year with all of our respective, things that we had needed rental fees for. And so the immediacy of like relieving that burden was awesome. But then, the practical reality of going, well, that doesn't begin to cut maybe some of the larger capital needs in the space that we're moving into. I think moving, for our church, setting up and tearing down every week, moving from an energetic core of people who are setting up, tearing down, happy to do it, a little worn out by the end of it, but then move into like, you facility maintenance and long-term strategic plan, especially if you are a church planter that lives in the, we don't need a building. The church is not a building. It's a body.
It's
and
people,
if you've discipled that language into the people in your church and you've rallied them around it, and then suddenly have to be like, well, we need to build a long-term strategic plan for the HVAC system. it's a bit of a weird shift. And I think we felt a little bit of that. Just like, it relieved an immediate, obviously very large financial burden, but like shifting that into an actionable, where are we going? Because we did it fairly quickly with the relationship that was facilitated. Happened pretty quickly, and we were able to count the cost and do some things initially. But, beyond that 30, 60 days of like, what's the cosmetic ways to like make this work? We didn't, it took a little bit to ask those longer term structural questions.
And spiritual bypass is the practice of treating a real problem or challenge with a spiritual principle or a theological ideal that really doesn't solve the problem. Right? It's like the Pharisees saying, what we were going to do to honor our mother and father, we dedicated it to the temple. So you can break the commandment under the guise. How does that function? This is how that functions. We say we need a building, we need a building, we need a building, but we don't count the costs. We don't have a sacred shift type of curriculum that prepares our church not only to find a space, but to occupy the place we find.
Right, exactly.
So, in the world where as families we look for homes, we have a realtor prepare us. You need this and this document and this much money in the bank. And then when you get in there, you have to pay taxes and furniture. And you know what I mean? We think about it in the human realm. What are going to be the fiscal or the familial implications of me owning a home? But when it comes to church, it's almost like we finally got a building. And it's like, okay, but there's other stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Like now, who cleans the bathroom? Now, when there's a leak and you come in on Sunday morning and the bathroom's overflooding, you know what I mean? It's like, no, it's us now.
Yeah. Exactly.
This is our place. So this is why we emphasize that. But let me ask you this. The space you found, tell us about that space, its history, and up to the time that you found it.
Yeah. So it was a church started in 1884, Riverside Baptist Church, started, to serve and care for people on the south side of this peninsula community that were not, by the caretakers and people that had vision for it, going, hey, they're not going to come up to our church on the front side of the neighborhood. So they got their church, the Lee Street Memorial Baptist Church, to plant them as a Sunday school mission. They did that for 6 years, and out of that birthed a church community in 1890, which served the neighborhood, South Baltimore neighborhood, Riverside neighborhood faithfully until 2016 was I think the part where they began to say, hey, we can go on in perpetuity, but we are smaller in number and advanced in age, and our pastor is ill. And so we need to, it really was like, hey, many years of like, we know something needs to change, but we're not sure what needs to change, kind of became something is going to change quickly and we need to take action. Yeah. So that was kind of their story. They just, we'd like to say that, 135 years this October of presence on that corner that, we're part of that story now.
That's so amazing. And it emphasizes the point that we always try to emphasize, which is every church has a life cycle. And without that life cycle, you're up and down and you're always trying to create more sustainability. And, you have to face real life problems like Act 6, all those types of things. And every church should have a legacy plan, because the people who planted that church, Lee Street, and the people who originally were in that church, they're all gone now.
Right.
And now a large percentage of the people who occupied the church over the last 100 years, they're not there anymore. But you know what is there? The building.
Right.
Every building outlives every congregation. And the lesson here is that churches can memorialize their buildings. They can arrange things so that there's a high probability that their assets and their buildings will live on in perpetuity in service to the kingdom of God. And so this church is a great example of that, because when the pain points came, they were willing to say, what could we do to ensure that this property remains useful for the kingdom, doesn't become condos,
Yeah.
doesn't become another irreplaceable loss in the kingdom of God. And that's something really amazing. So once you guys got in there and you begin to adapt, and now you're in the building and you're looking around, talk to us about what happened in your community and what kind of things kind of shook out.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things I think what was pretty surprising to me, and it played off the legacy of the previous community, was kind of overnight we went from young 20 and 30 somethings to a population of people who would not have come to other facilities, or a banquet hall in a very kind of swanky neighborhood. But this neighborhood, this particular church, had a good reputation with our unhoused population. And they were trusting, even till the very end, the Riverside Baptist Church to meet some of their needs. And so we were immediately kind of Act 6, like, well, now we have this population of people tracking with us that never came before. People that were distrustful of a church that met in a banquet hall were suddenly trustful of a church that met in a building. And suddenly the people that like the fact that we didn't meet in a banquet hall, or like that we did meet in a banquet hall, were like, I don't know about this big building that says Jesus saves on the side. This feels a little, so it was an interesting thing for us to figure out, okay, what does it mean to sort of rethink? We literally only moved, I think it's 0.8 of a mile in location, but like from how we function and live in the neighborhood, how we embody and utilize the space that's been entrusted to us. Yeah. Like we were starting to figure it out. We moved in 2018. We were starting to figure out, we were starting to feel real good about it. Then COVID happened. And then we felt, after about a year of trial and error, felt really good about that. And then all those things, it's a new era. Right. So that's a little bit of, I think the practical tension that we felt, as well as, there's still, we're, I think, a 5-year-old church plan at that point. So we're asking those core financial sustainability and local governance, benchmarks that kind of help your organizational, entities that planted you go, okay, like we feel good about where this is going. And I think what that did a little bit was it made kind of, how do we inhabit this space kind of secondary to those questions, just because we were still practically kind of growing into some maturity and those other ways. Yeah. So, they were, the secondary conversation to, what are you going to do about this air conditioning system or the bathrooms was secondary to, are you going to make the budget that you'd set even for that year? And so that's a little bit of the practical tensions, I think, early on.
And your church, it's interesting because the Riverside Baptist was planted. And then, if my history serves me correct, Riverside Baptist was given to another church into the city. Yeah. Right. And then you got it from that church, right? Right. So it stayed in church hands.
Right. Yeah.
And was utilized by churches for churches. Yeah. In perpetuity.
Yeah. We like to say, we say this in one of our like Discover classes, that 3 churches had to have a vision for, kind of gospel kingdom community, right? That you had a church that had to say, this grieves us. This is the hardest thing we'll ever do, but we need to push through, and we need for this to remain a gospel presence on this corner. We need to yield our ownership of it. Yeah. Another church acquiring that and going, well, we could move into it ourselves, or we could flip it for $1 to serve another thing. But instead saying, hey, we're making this available to another church that's actually in this neighborhood. Right. And figuring out how we can collaborate and partner together. And then at a time going, hey, we actually think the best thing for us to do would be to acquire it from you. And that lets you go do a thing, and it lets us do a thing here. But you've put us in the position, you've facilitated for us the ability to do that. Yes. And so, I like to say there's 3 churches that had to have a shared vision for what a kingdom presence on that corner would look like for us to be doing what we do right now.
What would happen? What would need to happen in us, Pastor Scott, for that story not to be so unique? Because we know churches, Riverside Baptist is the story in the United States. We have an ecclesiological pandemic going on. Churches are declining. 80% of churches are plateaued and are dying. That's not bad news. That's just news. You know, you can choose to see it as bad news, or you can just say, God's up to something. Mm-hmm. What could we do as a kingdom of churches to perpetuate those type of stories? Mm-hmm. What kind of mindsets, what kind of things do we need to be thinking about in order to put ourselves in those situations?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that and I know this is true even for me, like the push of Sunday's always coming, it tends to silo me. Like it does tend to silo me in the sense of going, oh yeah, I forget about the broader movement of God happening in my city. Mm-hmm. And I do, the best version of myself, right? And the best version of our church wants to be like one ingredient to the greater thing God is doing.
Yeah.
But I think like, so one thing I think is ways that we like begin even now to be in community together, you know, kind of try to care for each other, know one another's stories, whether we're, whatever minimal ecclesiologies we have that sort of make us like, hey, we can play well together.
Yeah.
I don't think it all needs to end up with like matching T-shirts and
right.
like, but there does seem to be some sense of like what's going on and what are your challenges and what are my challenges. I think that's one particular element. I mean, I think for us, the thing I look back on is so far as it depends on us is that those relationships and that posture coming in probably did help us. When we came in and said we are this is very silly semantics in one sense, but I think it is maybe a little bit of what you identified earlier. Hey, we are a church for the city. We're not the church for the city.
There you go.
Yeah. And there is like there is this, when you have like kind of the heart of a church planter, you're like, we've got to do the thing. We're going to be the church who does this. And, to know that you're one ingredient in the greater thing that God is doing, and to speak, and you identified it earlier, like we tend to speak about the things that are already there from a place of kind of contempt, or even like this, well, if they had been faithful, or if they had engaged the neighbors the way we're going to engage the neighbors, this would never be a thing. This isn't, not to say like, well, what if their pastor was ill?
Right.
And they had a tremendous burden placed upon them, or, whatever it is. Those are some of the things that come to mind for me, and I think challenge me now to now as I'm kind of the, an awkward teenager in terms of church years.
Yeah.
How do I have a spirit of, hey, who's trying to do what here? And who do I know that's, man, they're really looking for partnership because they're really struggling to make ends meet, and trying to think about that well for ourselves too.
Yeah. You guys have done a really good job at that. Seriously. Not just because you're on the podcast, because I was recently at one of your event and you had all these community partners in, and you had like nonprofits, and there was like a dialogue about what ideas do you have for the neighborhood and about maybe for our space? Is there things you see about our space that we don't see, how it might be used for the greater good?
Right.
That capital K kingdom mindset, it's so great. It reminds me so much of the saints in Jerusalem. They have a famine, shut down famine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And although the churches are in all these different cities with all their unique tribal, cultural, particularities, it's like they're starving. Let's collect an offering and send it.
Right.
We're on the same team at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And like you said, we don't have to wear all the same jerseys, but at the end of the day, we are a part of something bigger.
Yeah.
How do we do that? And it makes me think that the Foundry and Riverside Baptist Church, that history and that legacy is going to live on for 100 more years, as long as the DNA stays where the DNA is right now.
Mhm.
And with someone like you and your staff and the ideas and the values that your people have, I could see that church living on in perpetuity long after you guys are gone,
Right,
whether
yeah.
that's because, the Lord takes you home in 60, 70 years or whatever. But that's what we need.
Yeah.
That's really a core crux thing. So let me ask you this. You've gone through this whole process and you guys are now here. What kind of things are you doing in your building now?
Yeah, well, I think the whole process of identifying, hey, what are the the pain points and what are the things that just are immediately, we know they're going to. We know there's a boiler that's on borrowed time. We know there's these things that like, hey, need to have a So some of it's been practical, like, hey, we really have to put into priority some of these long-term capital things. In another sense, getting that sense of having met with the community, having met with neighbors and community partners and said, hey, if this was available to you more regularly, how would you use it? What needs would it meet? Being able to compile those things and ask good questions of architects and folks to say, hey, let's count the cost there in terms of, how can this building be better resourced? And then I think the third part of that is, it's been a healthy check for us to say, after 12 years in particular, we have our own sacred cows. We have our own, hey, we like to do things this way. And it's been healthy for us, even kind of paying attention to, hey, in the practical kind of dust up of long-term strategic plans. What is God doing here now? The thing that was 5 years ago was maybe for a particular season, but is there, how do we meet these new needs? The community, though you may look around and you go, well, it doesn't seem that different than it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
The things neighbors are saying to us are slightly different than things I think they would have said to us 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And does our, do how we, put that into motion, does it reflect that as well? So yeah, that's kind of how we're thinking through it. We're thinking through, hey, we've learned some things that like right now we could begin to address.
Mm-hmm.
We've learned some things that, hey, from a better financial stewardship, we could begin to, hey, if we really did prioritize on a local level, we've learned a little bit about, man, there's things that our neighbors are asking for that we just hadn't considered, and giving that some consideration. And then this other side, which is like, hey, from a long-term strategic plan, is this a moment to think differently so that the next 100 years are addressed?
Yeah. And when you guys before you got in the building, has your church grown or have you kind of plateaued or what's happened?
Well, we've definitely grown. And, it's been interesting the past, 5 years in particular. We are a very transient neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had these waves of like, but the baseline always ends up a little bit higher.
Right.
So it's like you go up and you go, but then you're here and then you're up and you're here,
Right.
you're up and here. So it's kind of looked like that.
Yeah.
With COVID and, then everyone kind of finding their dream home there for a little bit than 22 or whatever that was. And
it's so interesting to me that Riverside Baptist has a building and that church gives their building to another church, and then you guys work with that church, and it's like the life cycle of one church comes to an end so that the life cycle of another church can begin.
Mm-hmm.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. It's so kingdom.
Yeah, it is.
What would you say to a pastor or a church, a deacon board that's facing issues of sustainability? They're like, money's low, numbers are down, we don't know, we're uncertain. What would you say to them?
Mm-hmm.
When they have a building?
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things I would say probably practically is begin to reach out to people like Sacred Spaces, because I think one of the things that's hard in that committee is that the grief starts to come in to the bargaining, right? Like, and that's just a reality. If we're talking about life cycles and seasons of life, it's really hard when someone you love is at the end. Yeah. And to know, is this a long goodbye? Just on a practical level, I know that grief, and so there's a little bit. I think the hotshot church planter meets a deacon board like that and is like, well, I don't understand. This is very clear cut.
Right.
This is very easy. I can tell you where this is going to end. But when you're from the position of a young church planter, it's like, I'm trying to have a practical conversation with people who are in emotional and social grief.
Yeah. Over loss.
Like, there's loss, right? So just reaching out to, to be in that position where you can reach out to someone like Sacred Spaces and say, hey, let's just, what are our options? How do we think well about this? Is there anyone, here that we can be connected to? And I think having that middle person was super helpful. Having Gallery Church and in that was super helpful for probably the long-term, like, fond feelings that Riverside Baptist and the Foundry have for one another. Yeah. If they're, I have fond feelings, and the people that still speak to me, like, are very, very generous, but there was a lot of grief, and like having someone like yourself that can come in and like respect that, but also redirect it to say, hey, this is hard. Yeah. This is really tough. We're not minimizing that. You baptized your kids here. You saw your friends get married here. You buried friends in this building. You have so many things that God did in this space, but what you want is God to continue to do that in that space. Yeah. So for that to happen, who can help us make that happen? Yeah. So that would be, then shameless plug for you, I guess. But I think one of the things, we had that before we met you. Yeah. And when I look back on that, I go, like, spaces like that can facilitate that collaboration and teamwork through the practical, messy, muddy grief of doing it is a pretty great asset to have. Yeah.
Churches, when they face these types of declining numbers, declining finances, increasing building obligations, the only thing that happens when they put them off is they compound. Mm-hmm. They get harder to solve. Not impossible, but harder to solve. And so that's why, as you said, we're passionate about our sustainability assessments, which helps churches get a real clear picture of where they're actually at and in terms of sustainability, and how prepared are you to pass the property on, or even if you want to sell it, those types of things. What do you want to happen, and where are you at in the life cycle, and what could you do to revise or revitalize, and those types of things. That's great. You've been a joy for us to work with, and you're working on some new things now in the building, and you've got a vision to make a few tweaks to the building. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, we're excited. I think the programmatic team that the Sacred Spaces kind of empowered us to run with, which just another cool thing. I think one of the things that the Sacred Spaces process has been for the young church in this transaction or exchange has been like there's a group of people in your church whose like potential that you just don't think about, like, oh man, some of these engineering, architectural minds, they're not throwing themselves out there to be like, hey, I'd really like to do this long-term strategic plan, right. Or just when it be like, one of the things that's been cool is just the energy that's been activated. Yeah. So with that energy that's been activated, it hasn't just been, well, Scott says we should do this thing. Right. There has been, a group that has like kind of created the list of the long-term hey, capital things that need to be addressed, but then let's look at from a place of feasibility, these three things where there is an overlap between the priorities of the congregation and the needs of the community.
Yeah.
And can we, what would that cost? What would that look like? And how can we build a strategic plan around that? So how do we expand our kids' offerings in terms of space, just physical space, so that Monday through Friday, there are more opportunities for families to utilize and interact with the space. Practically speaking, how do we bring dignity to our folks that need accessibility to get into the space?
Yep.
And what streams might help us think well about that, even though it's really costly. It's really how do we think about that well? So we're talking with architects about that, and I'm talking about and just thinking about then. Apparently in 1890, no one went to the bathroom inside because we have two of the smallest little bathrooms in this building. And just knowing that, hey, if you look at just the practical side of someone walking into, this is, I think, just a constant collision that happens at the Foundry, where you are both charmed by the historicity of the building and like annoyed by the historicity of the building.
It's just different.
Right? Like it's just, in one sense, you get to romantically go, man, people have prayed through other pandemics. People have prayed through cultural upheaval in this room, literally in this seat. But apparently they didn't need to go to the bathroom ever, when they were in this building, because so just like that I think that, trying to, and what's that list of things that we can address too. So, so it's that intersection kind of in the Venn diagram, of like, what is the neighborhood asking for? What is the local predicament? What do we feel called and empowered to do? And then what is the physical facility able to accomplish, with minds more creative than me, thinking, well, what if you did this? What if you took out these walls? What if you did that? So I'm grateful.
One of our founding beliefs and principles is that the majority of the time churches face challenges, the solution's within. If you look at it theologically, most of the problems that God's people face were solved from within.
Yeah.
And so we're really passionate, as you know, about helping churches mobilize and identify their gifts, their assets, and helping them to create those solutions to their challenges.
Yeah. And can I speak to one thing there? Because I think, and this may have been a COVID moment thing, but coming out of the kind of the initial big lift of COVID and when are we going to be indoors and when are we going to meet together? There was a little bit of like internalized pressure of like, I have to have the solution to the problem versus what you were talking about.
Exactly.
I have to come up with some great innovation that's going to lead us into the next season.
Right. And
I think what this process has been really good for me is trusting that what you just said is true.
Yeah.
That I am not the only person that loves this church. I'm not the only person that loves this building. I am not the only person that loves this community. And it's going to actually not be as great if it's just Scott's idea that we run with.
Right.
But knowing for me as kind of the lead pastor that there's some people that are being helped to fight for the thing that matters most well. Mm-hmm. I can endorse what you're saying there. And what it's meant to us to be part of this process and have a team like yourself.
Yeah, we're grateful for a partnership with you guys. You guys have taken the things we've given you and you've run with it. You're a model for that. Seriously. I mean, I've had an opportunity to talk with your team on some Zoom calls, meet them in person, go to some of these community meetings, and you're just implementing things that are there, and God's blessing you. Any last words for anyone who's listening?
we love Sacred Spaces. It's been a really great thing. So yeah,
we didn't pay him to say.
Yeah, no, he didn't. That's we're so grateful. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you. Grace and peace.